Hello everyone, welcome to the Pushing Limits podcast. This is your host Ash. I've been sitting here editing this episode after DNFing the Berlin Marathon, and I'll be honest, it's been a low moment. Walking away without finishing was tough, and I am still struggling with it. But as I re-listened to Killian talk about his own DNF in past years, and looking at where he is right now, I couldn't help but appreciate him even more. His story is a reminder that DNF aren't the end. They are actually part of the journey. They are the stepping stones towards becoming a newer, stronger version of yourself. And today, Killian is on course to break the Michael McKnight's record from 2019. And this is what has struck with me. Failure isn't final. It can refine you if you let it. Killian has shown us what happens when you lean into hard moments, say yes to the challenges, and keep showing up. This episode isn't just about running, it's about life. And I promise you, if you listen closely, you'll walk away inspired, just like I did. And in that note, please let me introduce to our guest today. Here is Killian. Hey Killian, welcome to the podcast. It's been one of the conversations I'm looking forward to. You have been lighting up the ultra world in the last year or so. You have won so many things, like Tahoe. You again took Bigfoot. And I'm looking forward to have a conversation with you and see how you do it, basically.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's great to be here. And yeah, it has been a good past year for me, for sure.
You are pretty well known at this moment in ultra world, right? Everybody know who is Killian Korth. But for the folks who don't know who Killian Korth is, how would you introduce yourself?
Obviously I'm an ultra runner. I'm a full-time coach now as well. So you're in Germany, right? I was born in Germany. I lived overseas most of my life. My dad worked for the military, spent some time over there, and then went to college back in the US. I was a swimmer for most of my life. I swam through college. And then after I was done swimming, needed something to do that would give me some structure and focus on something physical. So that's where running came into the picture, and the rest is history, as they say.
So why did you pick running? Because swimming could have also done the similar thing. It is structured, it is competitive, but you took ultra running. Why and what made you to decide to take this path?
I was a competitive swimmer from basically the age of 8 to 21. And like a lot of collegiate swimmers end up getting burnt out with the sport. And that's how I would describe how I felt after 4 years of swimming in college. So I was looking for something different, and then went on a few backpacking trips in Virginia, West Virginia, in the mountains there. And I was like, oh, okay, so I really like this. I like being outside. I want to enjoy the outdoors. Endurance sports definitely appealed to me. I had a lot of experience as a kid with long distance cycling. My parents, my brother, and I would go on lots of cycling trips, carrying all of our tents and our gear and everything. The summer I turned 8, we actually bicycled from Fort Collins to Seattle, which took like 46 days, Colorado to Washington, camping the whole time. Every now and then we stayed in hotels and stuff. But those types of experiences as a kid, I think, probably instilled a love for the long haul in me from the get-go. And when I approached running, the ultra world seemed to beckon right away. And once I ran a marathon that I hadn't trained for in 2017, and it was terrible, and I said, I'll never do this again. And then in 2018, I ran a marathon that I did prepare for, and very quickly I was like, oh, okay, I just want to go further, get to the longer distances. And that, for whatever reason, just appealed to me. The puzzle piece just fit right into my brain, and I was like immediately addicted.
Running is addictive. Like when you, especially, I mean, you went pretty quickly from marathon to ultra distances, but for other folks, 5K, 10K, and then half, and then marathon, it becomes like a trend where it escalates quickly. So when did that happen to you? And when did that moment occur in your life when you were doing these endurance events, right? The big, huge distances. When did you realize that, oh shit, I can win these things?
My ultra running started in 2018, and I probably accelerated too fast to the longer distances. So within 6 months, I went from running a marathon to finishing a 100-miler, which I finished, but poorly. It was like 31 hours or something, and I went out way too fast and made all the possible rookie mistakes. But then, I was like, okay, I feel like I may not have elite level speed, so I doubt I would be able to be particularly competitive at a really fast 100 miler like Western States or something like that. But what I never doubted was that I had the mentality to just keep moving. And so, right upon entering the sport, like second year, 2019, as I'm approaching a few different 100 milers, I was already thinking of I'd like to get into long trail FKT attempts, like fastest known times. So, setting the speed record on the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail, things like that. So, I was already by those multi day, longer distance efforts, even than just 100 miles, which at the time I had a lot of steps to go in between there, hence why I transitioned to focusing at the 200-mile distance because it seemed like an obvious intermediate step between 100 miles and 100 miles. Yeah, and then as I was getting into the 200s, I've always believed, I was like, I think that I can be competitive at this distance because it doesn't require you to be elite level fast. You don't need a 2.5 hour marathon PR to be really competitive at 200 miles. I described it for a while, or I have described it this year as this delusional self-belief that I really didn't have a ton of evidence for that I could be competitive at the top of these really long events. But every time I entered a 200 miler from the first one in 2022, which was Cocodona, and I tore my hamstring during that race, so it didn't finish. And but every time I towed the line, I just had this belief. I was like, I think I can win this thing. And between 2022 and 2025, I tried a lot of different 200s, and only this year has it actually, that quote delusional self-belief, only this year has it really paid off.
Why do you think that is? You obviously, like we are talking about earlier on, you had some breathing issues while doing the cocodonas, and you said you just tore the hamstring. So, what has been the differences back then when you're doing the 250, and now you are crossing the 200 field marks? Like you are just going and winning all of those.
So I think some major changes. One is some fueling changes during the race for the most part, inspired by David Roche and his push towards higher carbohydrate intake. I have upped the amount of carbs I'm taking per hour and started to train more with some fueling as well. So I'm still on the lower carbohydrate side of things, typically day to day, but mostly I have, or for races, I have upped my carbohydrate intake significantly. Also inspired by David Roche, I've really leaned into using caffeine for these races and making sure that I can stay alert, especially the first night, and then going into night sections for these multi-day events. So some fueling changes have made a big difference. And then there's just a learning process that happens with training. I think that for a long time I was just caught in the endurance mindset of more is always better. And so I would push through some pain during training that really I shouldn't have pushed through. And so becoming more mindful of how your body reacts over time to training stimuli, I think can make a big difference to how you end up feeling on race day. So instead of necessarily optimizing for fitting in as many miles as I could per week, I'm now focused on showing up on race day as healthy as possible. And I think that has made a big difference. And then, especially from 2024 to this year, so I DNF'd Cocodona and Tahoe in a row in 2024, which was really hard mentally for me. But I was showing up to those races with this kind of egotistical mindset that, like, I need to be doing these for my running career and I should be attaining these goals, such and such. Like, why haven't you succeeded yet? All these things. So I was like piling all this pressure on myself that was like existential in nature and very like egotistical in terms of the way I'm thinking about my place in the ultra running world. Whereas this year I've managed to shift that mindset into really just trying to have more fun. And so it sounds a little bit trite to say it, but like focusing on the fun side, like ultimately the reason that I want to do these things is that I love being outdoors and I love moving for great period or like long periods of time through beautiful places. And so focusing on that aspect for me has really helped mentally to relieve a lot of the pressure I was putting on myself, and then allows me to be more relaxed going into the races. At Tahoe, for instance, like my whole goal for the first 60 miles was just to have fun, like just run and enjoy yourself. And I did. And so not only does that result in a better mindset going into these things, but it also, I think, helps you physically because when you're anxious in a race and you're running tight, like your heart rate's going to be a little bit higher. You're not going to be as relaxed with your stride and those sorts of things. So I think the mindset plus the physical interplay with the focus on fun has really been a big difference for me this year.
That is so true because I don't run like you, but I felt the same way too. When I was going into the marathons, that putting this expectation of that I need to achieve this and I need to nail this marathon and I need to get my PR and all this kind of mindset. And even when I was training, it just felt like a job and it was not fun because every run was like, okay, I need to hit this pace and I cannot relax. I need to do it. And over time, when you do it. And then if you don't get the goal, and then it's like the failure is, in a sense, if you don't get the goal, then it's disheartening. And it's like, oh my God, I tried so long for so long and it sucks. I can get it. But I like how he said that now, as you have changed this whole mentality of going and just enjoying it. I think that
Mhm.
makes a huge difference. And I've talked to a few people who has done the same thing where they are more not too focused on the time. They want to get the time, but instead of that, just trying to have this approach of having fun, and they have really excelled. So I think that kind of worked. And you are putting with the work too. I mean, you are not doing anything different, right? So you're putting the same amount of work. So I think that's a huge change, and I'm glad
Yeah.
it's working on you. And we'll see how it will do in Moab. That's coming next.
Um, yeah, definitely. I think like the simple way to phrase it would be to focus on process oriented goals rather than results oriented goals. And so it's instead of thinking I want to place in any kind of way or hit my PR, it's like what can I do in order to improve along the way? More about the journey, less about the outcome.
When you're running marathon, that is very difficult to see. If you're running ultras, that is, you can see, you can imagine the journey when you're like going from 50K to let's say 100 mile or something like that. But when you're just focused on running marathon, then this tunnel vision is just about that trying to get the PR because there is nothing else. You know, if you run a marathon, you want a PR every time. So that
Yeah,
was
yeah.
me too, like this tunnel vision where you go. And talking about this 200 ranges, right? So you won Tahoe, you won Bigfoot. How did that felt, and what does it mean to you personally? Going and beating the best of the best, Bigfoot had some big names on
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, so crossing the finish line at Tahoe, really, I just felt like super relieved. That was the primary emotion. What's funny about these races is that in the moment when you finish, even when you win, even when you have a great race, the thing that you're most excited about is just the fact that you can be done running. Like you can just sit down and I just don't have to be anywhere and I don't have to keep force feeding myself gels and all of those things. So like in the moment, it is just, oh, thank you, I'm finally done. But zoomed out from that, Tahoe is just like the race that dispelled all my doubts. So last year and years prior, having DNFs and kind of high profile implosions in races and stuff like that, it's just like self doubt builds up over time, and so you're just like, I believe I can be competitive. I believe I can win these things, but where's the proof? I didn't have it yet, and so Tahoe. Finally, I was like, okay, I broke this version of the course. I broke the course record, won by a significant amount, and just put in a performance that I could really be proud of. Tahoe is just relief that I wasn't a crazy person. At least I had been believing in myself in a way that it turned out to make sense after all. And then Bigfoot was different because Tahoe, I had everyone gets some breathing issues at Tahoe because of pollen there. We were talking before we started recording about allergies and stuff. Yeah, Tahoe's rough for that reason. So even my last 70 miles there was just really slow and a slog. But Bigfoot, as far as it was the best race of my career. And crossing the finish line of Bigfoot felt really good because I was like, I think that course has changed a little bit too. And this course had never, this specific version of it had never been run before. But you take all those factors into consideration. And I think the performance I had at Bigfoot is one of the best at that race ever. And so that was a really good feeling. And it was during the race, I was getting to aid stations way before they expected people to be there. So it was always fun to surprise some of the volunteers and be there like 2 hours before they expected anyone. And that race, I pretty much felt good from the get go, no major lows. And so like that one, I was like, okay, like I can not only be competitive, but I can be hoping to set records and have these races go really well. I want to break the overall Triple Crown record, and the time that I need to do that at Moab sounds achievable to me. So after Bigfoot, it was like, okay, now I can focus on breaking Mike McKnight's record from 2019. After Tahoe, there was some time where I was like, God, I can't believe I have 2 more of these races to do this year. But after Bigfoot, with how successful it was, I pretty quickly transitioned into being able to focus on Moab. So that was just really gratifying in that, okay, my overall goal for the year is within reach now. It's like I have one more race to focus on, just a couple more days of serious effort to put in. And so it was, yeah, finishing that one, I was like immediately back into the zone of, okay, how are we going to make the overall Triple Crown record happen? How can I succeed at Moab, which will be, I think, topographically, it's the flattest. And so that's my weakest part of my overall running. So it's like, how can I address that? And so I pretty quickly just transitioned into a training mindset after Bigfoot.
And like we were talking about earlier on, you still say that you had so much improvement over the years when you did the big Tahoe, and then Bigfoot too, probably the similar thing because you put him with last time, but this year you went and you crossed it and broke everything there that needs to be broken. So, what was the major difference between the last Bigfoot you did and this year?
A lot of the stuff we talked about already, so fueling, that sort of thing. I have also just gotten better at taking care of some of the other minor details, quality of life things while you're running, like chafing and blisters. This year, in both 200-mile races, I've had no blisters, which is pretty awesome. So, yeah, taking care of some of those things. And then I like going into Bigfoot 2023, I just overtrained and I started the race even after a taper already feeling tired and fatigued. Whereas now I've really dialed in. I feel like I'm much better at paying attention to the signs from my body during training that might be happening, and I'm showing up on race day feeling really good. It also is just, after Tahoe, I'm like running with freedom a little bit because I know that I can win these things, and so it's just like easier approaching these. I didn't have any nerves for Bigfoot, didn't feel nervous, just felt totally relaxed on race week, which was nice. And then I've talked about this in a few conversations in my Bigfoot race report though too, but my aid stations the transitions at aid stations have become so efficient. Like at Bigfoot, for instance, the guy who came second, his name's Brody, his moving time was actually more than an hour faster than mine, but I stopped for almost 2 hours less than he did. Like my aid station transitions are, I think, pretty close to top notch. My longest stop at Bigfoot was about 11 minutes, and that was for changing all my clothes, eating some rice, washing my feet, changing socks, changing shoes, like doing all the possible things that you can do at an aid station. Got that done in just about 10 minutes, like a little over. And then stops where I wasn't doing that were 2 minutes or below. And so running these 200s a little more like 100 in that way and focusing on that aid station efficiency has been a huge change for me. And that I started doing because I ran with, I don't know if you know who Jeff Browning is, but I ran with him at Cocodona 2024 for a while. And we came into the first crude aid station together. And then we did the same things, but he was done 5 minutes faster than I was. And I was like, okay, so there's a big improvement I can make here. And so that's something I've really focused on as well. And that requires a lot of support from my crew. My mom was out at Bigfoot. My wife is typically crew chief for these things. And so having them really organized and kind of me being just totally focused in those moments on getting these tasks finished rather than like taking my time at aid stations. So that's been huge too.
Minor details, right? Minor
Yeah, totally.
details. Yeah. And we were talking about earlier, right? More up to 40, Coconut 250. Those are the multi-day events. And compared to the Lake Tahoe and the Bigfoot, what has been the major differences that you have found so far? Because you have done all of those, right? You have done different kind of 200 distances. So in your experience, what is the major differences that you see at this moment?
Yeah, so climate's the obvious one. Tahoe, I mentioned earlier, everyone kind of deals with some breathing issues because that race is in June and there's just tree pollen that is just so thick in the air. At night, you can see it in your headlamp. If you park your car for a little while, you just have yellow all over your car in 10 minutes. So that makes a huge difference. Bigfoot is lower elevation. It can be really humid and hot. Cocodona and Moab, obviously in the desert, you deal with a lot of temperature changes, so it can be really hot during the day, super dry, and then it can be really cold at night. So like climate's a big difference, I think, but the thing that I've probably focused on the most, because I feel like for the most part the climate doesn't affect me too much. I'm pretty good in the heat, I'm pretty good in the cold, but the topography of the race is huge for me. So Bigfoot is plays to my strengths. The trails are super rugged. There's a lot of climbing. It's constantly up and down. There's not that many flat sections. And I am typically better in the mountains like that than I am on flats. Whereas Moab is 40 miles longer than Bigfoot and has 15,000 feet less elevation gain. So it's much, much flatter. And I find that to be pretty mentally challenging. I live close to Moab. I'm only like an hour and a half away. So I will be going out to train on some of those flatter sections of the course to practice. But a lot of that is going to be like there's a section between mile 126 and 170, so about 45 miles that only has 2,000 feet of climbing, and so you have to run that whole section. And I think I'm going to find that really difficult. And Cocodona is similar. There's a section of Cocodona once you are in the last 50 miles where it's 30 miles of just a tiny bit uphill all on a Jeep road, but you have to run it if you want to be competitive. And I just find that so challenging mentally, because what I like about the mountains is that you have little flat sections, but you have ups and downs. And so you get to walk, you get to hike and use your poles, and you get some like mental breaks where you're using your muscles a little bit differently and having some slower miles in there. But the topography for me will be a challenge at Moab for sure. So that's a huge difference. And then when you get into adding on distance, like Cocodona's 250 miles, 50 miles is only a quarter of a 200 miler, but it makes a big difference. So you get to, whether or not you're at halfway at 100 miles or 125 miles, there's some mental change that has to go on with just how you assess that race. And when you talk about 200s, 50 miles sounds like a small distance in some ways, because it's just not. I will the biggest chunk, but it's not a small distance. And when you get to 200 miles and you have 50 miles left, 50 miles sounds like a really long ways at that point. So when you add distance, it starts making a big difference for sure. And I think like for Bigfoot and Tahoe, I've managed to get away with only sleeping for about 5 minutes. But for when you start getting longer and longer, I think that's probably less and less sustainable. So whether or not for a 250 I could do that, I don't know. But certainly if you like bumped it up to 300, I'd be like, okay, got to focus a little more on sleep here. And then you get to multi-day FKTs, and that becomes more and more important. So as you go longer, there are just like more pieces of the puzzle to assess.
I talked to 6 folks who did Cocodona, and I think the lowest was Harry Soberto's. When he won Cocodona 2024, he said he only slept for 15 minutes. But this year, when I talked to different folks, it was from like 1 hour, 30 minutes to 3 hours, like they slept. So it varied. So it won't be easy. I mean, it's 250 is a long, long time. Even though you are much more familiar with it, like you said, 50 miles is still 80 kilometers, right? That's a long way. And if you remember, right, the first time you did the trail race and then you crossed that finish line, and now you have experience of running so many awesome races and winning most of them, right? So which has been the most emotional race that you finished the line?
Man, that's hard to say. Probably Cocodona 2023, which I didn't win. I came 11th overall. I was 8th male, but I was leading for about 220 miles of that race. And then I mentioned I have had breathing problems at that race specifically, and those became really acute. And I assumed I was going to DNF. I had an 8-mile section of that race that probably took me 7 hours getting to an aid station. I got to that aid station. My O2 saturation was 82%, so I was hypoxic and I was having a really bad time. My pacer who was with me got to witness like a complete mental breakdown where I was just like sobbing in the middle of the trail because I had been leading and I was assuming that I was gonna not finish. But I slept for 5 hours and got some medical treatment that helped bump my O2 saturation back up to the low 90s for a little bit, and then just finished the last 22 miles of that. But that was all due to my crew, and so crossing that finish line felt like a total odyssey, and it was completely unexpected to me because I was like this. I assumed that this was going to end in failure a lot of that race. I ended up in the ICU later that evening after I finished. The story continued to be somewhat dramatic, but that was probably the most emotional just due to the nature of how that race unfolded. And then the first 100 was it was also pretty good. My first 100 I went out in the first 50 in 10 hours, and then the second 50 took me 21 hours. So the second 50 was just like absolutely brutal, and I like tried to fuel essentially only on Cliff Bars and bananas. So I like didn't eat anything for the last 40 miles, and I like just didn't know what to expect. And so finishing that one felt really good, just in terms of like, how did I even get here? Like, you kind of learn a lot in those moments where you're like, oh, okay, I was totally unprepared. And I had some tears in my eyes at the end of that. But yeah, it's hard to say. The joy from the finish is so ephemeral. It's so temporary. You get a lot from it, but like I said, with focusing on the journey rather than the destination, I think that there's sometimes this tinge of sadness when these races end, because the training is really what I enjoy, and I've been working so hard for this thing that you're like sad that the goal is over in some ways, which is weird to say. I'm sure that I'm going to have that feeling after Moab, mixed in with the relief of being done and all of that. But they're all emotional in different ways, and a lot of it has to do with kind of what happens in each particular race. If there's something really salient, what I mentioned with the breathing issues at 2023 Cocodona.
Like you briefly talked about, right? So when you go into the race and like the Kukuran, obviously you had breathing issues, and you said you had DNF and Tahoe as well. How do you take the setback? Do you go back and say, "Oh, well, I did my best, and I'm gonna try again," or you got so like pretty much harsh on yourself and like, God, I didn't even finish that. Like, how is your mindset at that moment?
So at the moment, bad. Yeah, in the moment, I think a lot of ambitious, really motivated people probably have brains that are not the best at being kind to themselves. And that's certainly something that I noticed after the 2 DNFs last year in a row. I wrote a blog post called "What's It Like to DNF?" And the first 3 lines of it were just thoughts that I'd been having on repeat. Like, you asked all these people to come out and support you, and you failed. Like, you think you're a coach, you think you should be winning these races, and you can't even finish them. And then just like much simpler, like, you're just a piece of shit. Those types of thoughts were being delivered to me on a conveyor belt by this like angry voice in my head that's helpful on the days that I don't feel like running and it makes me go run, but really maladaptive when things don't go well. So yeah, going through that process, you have to embrace a little bit of the dysfunction there. And I've meditated since college, and so knowing how to meditate and try to remove yourself from the identifying with thought as much was a really helpful skill in those time and like those kind of tough moments. But ultimately, it's just this like learning process. And I think the biggest thing that I came out with, the biggest lesson, is just that failure and success aren't opposites of each other. They're not a dichotomy or a binary like up and down or black and white or left and right. Failure is actually just a part of success. They're like inseparable as a concept instead of being opposites. And I look back at all my DNFs, even when I tore my hamstring or last year had breathing problems, I strained a hamstring at Tahoe is why I DNF'd last year. I look back at all of those as positive experiences in the long run. It's like, I wouldn't wish to repeat them. I wouldn't wish for anyone to have to go through something like that where you're being so unkind to yourself. But I do think I learned a lot. Just learned to address some weaknesses physically. I mentioned earlier the focus on fun being a big change for this year, and that's something that came directly out of those 2 DNFs. And they're negative experiences that I wouldn't wish to repeat, but that ultimately now have a positive valence for me, given that I feel like they've contributed directly to a lot of good changes that I've made to move forward with. But yeah, in the moment, it's so difficult to deal with that. And I think that anyone who's pushing themselves, especially if you're attempting to have a career in ultra running and you do have this self-belief, when you fail and there's just especially when you fail and you don't actually push yourself to like the breaking point. I think last year I stopped intelligently before I reached the breaking point. I don't want to get pulmonary edema again and have permanent scarring on my lungs, so it's smart to stop at Cocodona. But it's like your brain is able to turn that into a negative, being like, oh, you failed because you're weak and not because you didn't have a choice. But yeah, moving forward from those has been rewarding in a lot of ways. But that being said, they're not experiences I want to have again.
Definitely. And I always say that failure is the stepstone for the success because we learn so much, right? Because
Yeah.
failure doesn't necessarily mean that we are not capable or anything. It just shows us that what we need to improve. And like you said, like you are so much efficient now in smaller details. Like smaller detail matters when you're running these distances, 100 mile for instance, because you need to be off the block like 200 meters. So like you said, you only were doing 11 minutes per average on the aid station. That is incredible. Like that is fast. Yeah. So it is great. That is nice. I think hopefully people can learn more about this, how they can be efficient and improve them instead of being self-negative, which is very hard sometimes when you're going through these emotions. And when you're running this race, right? So 200 miles, 240 miles, so many emotions, right? Highs, lows, because like we said, you were leading up until 220 in the Cocodona, and then all of a sudden it was downward slope from there. So is there some mantras or something that you have to use when you're going through that low moment during the races?
A little bit, yeah. So I mentioned meditation earlier, just focusing on some physical feelings that aren't negative. When you're in a lot of pain and every step hurts, and if you're in a mental low, it can feel really overwhelming. But just being able to focus on breathing. As long as you're not having breathing issues, your breathing's probably not painful. And so if you can focus on like this one thing instead of how bad your feet hurt or your knees hurt or whatever, being able to remove yourself from the situation is mentally a little bit is a real benefit. But in 2023 Cocodona, for instance, I started repeating to myself, "I am the task," over and over again. And I'm a fan of Marcus Aurelius and Stoic philosophy. So if you think of the task does not feel pain, like the task is not a conscious being, it's just the task. And so like that, sometimes that helps me. And then there's just like little mind tricks that you can play on yourself. If you're in a section that you feel like you really should be running, but you're walking, like what I've said to people while pacing and what I've said to myself is just like, okay, so it hurts to walk and it also hurts to run. If you run, you're going to get there faster. Like you might as well be done sooner. And so there's like little tricks like that you can use to reframe something in your mind. So those are, they sometimes work, they sometimes don't. And then one thing that I also try to do that I learned from, I don't know if you've heard of Jocko Willink, but he was a Navy SEAL, and he talks about being in combat in Iraq. And whenever he'd get a radio message that something was going really wrong, he would just say out loud, he'd say, "Good, good, all right. I get the chance now to test my skills." And so I'll try to do that in races. I like in Bigfoot, there was one section where I probably had 90 grams of carbs fewer than I wanted to with me. And so I just had to space out my carbohydrate and calorie intake a little more than I would have wanted to. And so you could either look at that as, oh God, I can't believe I messed up, or good, okay, fine. Like I just get this extra chance to solve a little puzzle in the meantime, things like that. And then one other thing that I tell all my athletes to do, and that I have started doing since the Mogollon Monster in 2024, is just in hard moments, saying out loud to yourself, "I can do this." Positive self-talk. You can do this. You've worked really hard. Like, you're doing well. Talking to yourself as if you were trying to encourage another person has been really helpful. It can make you seem a little crazy if you're with people and you're talking to yourself on the trail, but it's helpful. You say, "I can do this," out loud. Something in just like expressing that thought can often somehow make you feel physically better. I don't know exactly how that works, but the sport is so mental that any little trick that you can play on yourself to get your mindset in a more positive place is going to have huge effects in the long term.
We were just talking about, right? You said this year's Bigfoot 200 was arguably like your best race you ever did because everything went perfectly from start to end. And has there been any race that went not so good from the start to the end?
And not so good from the start. I've had days where, so I don't know. For instance, I just as a training, couple of days in a row, I ran the Kokopelli Trail over 2 days, which is 150 miles. So I had a 75-mile day, and then it's 140 miles because I had a 75-mile day and a 65-mile day. And on the first day of that, for about 50 miles, I was just having no fun, and I felt like physically blah and just bad the whole day. And then somewhere around 50 miles, like I just started having fun all of a sudden. And I wasn't necessarily doing anything different. I guess I'd pushed through enough of the negativity that there was none left. And so I've had days, yeah, like that where 10, 12 hours into a longer effort, things just all of a sudden turn around. And then, but for the most part, for like the beginning of a race, I can't think of one that went badly right from the get go necessarily. I've had races that have gone better or worse than others, but I've been lucky in the sense that my lows have come at predictable times typically. But the mantra that anyone can use, and I first heard Courtney Dauwalter say this, but I'm sure she wasn't even the original one to say it, but it's just that things don't always get worse. You have to go through it to believe it, but I did a 150-mile race that was 6 25-mile loops, and I probably felt better on the last loop or in the last two loops than I did on the loops number 2 and 3. So it doesn't always make that much sense from a physical perspective, but if you're doing the things that you need to do to take care of yourself, hydrating, drinking water, and making sure that you're eating enough calories, like eventually things will turn around and you're going to feel better. But you just have to believe in that process and that kind of up and down cycle. And it's hard to when you haven't experienced it before because, like I said, it just doesn't really make that much sense.
When you are running these events, right, you are there pounding 200 miles, 250 miles, 240 miles. How does your recovery look like? Because you are putting a lot, and especially, right, you are hitting so much higher space, going to this insane elevations. How does the recovery look like after you are done with it? Goes home,
Yeah.
chill.
Yeah, it's difficult. The nice thing about a 200 is that I sleep pretty well the first night because you're just so tired that your brain is like, all right, we're going to go dark for a while here. Whereas opposed to 100, I typically have had trouble sleeping the night after. But the 10 days following a 200 are pretty awful. I feel like I've got brain fog. I can't think that well, like it, and then I like wake up feeling exhausted after sleeping, and your body is so uncomfortable that you toss and turn while you're trying to sleep, and then you nap during the day. And so what I think approaching the 3 200s this year in the Triple Crown, I didn't quite realize what I was signing myself up for in some ways, just because you basically are sacrificing like 30 days of your year. So 10 days after each race where you're just a zombie and I'm like incapable of doing anything and nothing productive is happening. I'm just like sitting on the couch trying to eat food. And then all of a sudden in the middle of the day, I'm like, oh, I'm going to take a 3 hour nap. So the week following is pretty difficult, but I've figured out at this point you just have to embrace that. It's like, again, you like reframe it to yourself. It's like, oh, I earned this. I earned this tiredness. I get to take these 3 hour naps in the middle of the day, even if I slept for 10 hours the night before. And then muscularly, I after Tahoe, I had a little bit of I wouldn't even call it a strain, but just a minor hamstring tightness going on. And then after Bigfoot, I had basically had a muscular knot kind of nestled up against my tibia. So my shin was really swollen and painful. And so I have a really good PT. I went and got dry needling done. And so I've tried to accelerate recovery as much as possible that way. But I think, especially if you're trying to run these races fast, expecting to come out of any of them clean is probably unrealistic. I've just been as cautious as possible with like my re-entry back into running after them. And then doing all three races this year, I feel like at the beginning of the year, you just have to accept like you're not going to be able to be as fit for the third race as you were for the first race. So the rest of after Tahoe, I've been thinking of my training as mostly maintenance. It's like safety first. Let's try to show up on race day as healthy as possible. Let's deal with all the issues from the previous race before we get into training for the next one. And then any weeks of quality training that I can fit in between the races are just a bonus. So I feel like I've recovered from Bigfoot really well. I've got 3 weeks before I need to taper before Moab, so I'll get some quality training in, which will be nice. But I'm going to be really on the cautious side with anything negative that I feel going on in my body, in my feet, my legs, anything like that. And so approaching the series with the safety first as the philosophy, I think has been really big. And then following races, focusing on protein intake, rebuilding muscles as much as possible. I have a really specific diet, and I've avoided all the foods that I know cause me extra inflammation. So like the year has just been extremely regimented and totally focused on this one goal. I mean, to the point that like I try not to go to the grocery store very often because I don't want to be around people and get sick. I'm like paranoid about some of those things, especially approaching the last race. I've managed to do it for these two. Now, if I can just do it for this last one. So for the last 2 weeks approaching Moab, I'll probably order the pickup option for groceries, and I probably will try to self-isolate as much as possible. And so we've talked a lot about the little details, and those little details all play into it as well, where I'm like attempting as much as I can to control all the variables that are within reaching distance for me.
That totally makes sense. I agree because I got sick right before the marathons and with the COVID and stuff like that. And it's not fun because you're totally done right after that.
Yeah.
And for you, right? So you have had experience where at the beginning, when you're doing these 100 milers, you were just going in and surviving, right? But now you go with in any race that you participate in the with the mindset that you're gonna win it. So in your opinion, what has been the difference in you when you are just going and surviving and going and winning now?
If we talk about my first 100, I didn't even do like a Google search where I could be like, what's smart to use to fuel? I didn't use Body Glide to avoid chafing. I was in shoes that were too small. I lost 7 out of 10 toenails my first 100. So I was the type who just dove in head first without doing any research at all. So learning by experience has always been huge for me in my life. I've just been the type of person who that's the best way for me to get the things really nailed down in my head. And so just learning from experience and not making the same mistakes twice. That's been huge. Trying to solve all the little problems, focusing on the little things, aid station efficiency, like we talked about, different fueling strategies. When I first started in the sport, I was a vegetarian, and now I'm not. I'm the opposite. I really focus on protein intake and I eat a lot of meat. But so there's been some strategic changes along those lines. And then it's also just there's part of it, so much of it that's a mindset thing. It's just like being confident in oneself and knowing that you've put the work in is always going to make you feel better on the start line. And so now that I'm a coach and I know how to train and I have a strength training routine and I have all of these other details figured out, I can be at the start line and not be worrying about what the past few months have looked like because I know that they've looked like what they need to, if that makes sense.
Now look at your journey, right? So you used to be a swimmer, and you said you were competitive from the age of 8. Insane, right? You've been doing this competition for so long, and when you were finishing the school, you said the 4 years were really tough, and you felt you were so burnt, right? Have you felt that yet in the running yet?
No, thankfully I haven't. And I think part of that is due to how mindful I've become with overtraining. So I don't ever want, even though running and coaching now is my career, I don't really want running to feel like a job in the sense like, ugh, I have to go out for my run today. I'm motivated enough that typically if I'm like, I feel like that, then that might be a sign that I need to take a day off or something like that. So I'm very mindful of doing too much, but also, and maybe there'll be a year that I'm like, I don't feel like doing any races this year. Maybe I'll get a decade into the sport, or I'll have several years where I do a bunch of 200s, or after a long FKT attempt or something, I'll be like, okay, I need a longer break. But I just love it so much, and I enjoy the training so much. Like the part that I enjoy most about being an ultra runner is just the ability to go to beautiful places and run for 6 hours. I get to go explore 30 miles of America's best national parks, and I can do that easily on a weekly basis. So it's like I live in the American Southwest, which is just filled with open space and public land, and I get to go explore it by foot. I feel so grateful for that privileged aspect of my life that it's hard for me to picture getting burnt out of the actual running. I could see taking a break from racing, but the running I just find so purely enjoyable. Like the long runs themselves are so fun for me. And it's not like I don't go out to bars or go to concerts or things like that. It's like not what my life and my peak experiences are made from. So I'm constantly looking forward to my next big 6 to 8 hour run in the wilderness. And so if somehow that love starts to turn sour, there'll be reasons to take longer breaks. But yeah, for now, it's hard to foresee that happening.
And in that topic, right? So, what is next for you? I know Moab is coming, Triple Crown. You're pretty much on track, like you said, to break the record for in a calendar year. So, what is that after that? Another course record, or you know, go overseas and do bunch of other races, UTMB?
So UTMB, there's too many hoops to jump through to get into UTMB. Like I would like to do
Mm.
Tour de Jean would be the race that I'd want to do in Europe. So that would, if I'm gonna go to the Alps, that's probably what I would want to do. It's more my distance anyway. And there's not quite as many. I don't have to get some certain number of stones from races and stuff. I don't even know exactly what you have to do to get into UTMB, but I just know that I
Lot of
don't feel,
stones.
yeah, I don't feel like jumping through those hoops is what I do know. But so it's hard for me to focus on what's next right now just because it's so salient and on my mind. And I'm like, I'm looking forward to taking an off season and having November and December be just down months. I'm going to limit my running. I'll focus on speed and strength and not so much volume. I'm working with some videographers to make a documentary about the Triple Crown and focusing on Moab specifically. So that'll be fun to focus on for a while. And hopefully that will come out late this year or early 2026. And then I am doing Cocodona in 2026, so in May. And so I'll probably start building up to that come January. And then my other goal for 2026 is to set the Colorado Trail FKT, so fastest known time. And the Colorado Trail runs from Denver to Durango. It's about 500 miles, and the FKT is 6 days and 17 hours. So that will be the next goal. And that's been on my radar ever since I became an ultra runner. Feeling like that's achievable and approaching that next year will be really exciting. But like I said, in my mind, I'm pretending that Moab is like the end of my ultra running career. I'm like, this is the only thing I have to focus on. It's hard for me to see past it. And, you know, I think the Triple Crown is such an undertaking. 200-mile races in a year is so much. Like I said, you're sacrificing 30 days of your year to recovery. The races themselves are so mentally and physically tough. Like, I think that I will be really looking forward, and I think I will enjoy taking just a little break from the pressure and the cycle of recovery, racing, all of those things.
That totally makes sense. And we were talking about it, and you said you went hit first on your first ultra marathon, right? So would that Killian believe that the Killian you are now and conquering all these events and breaking all records?
Yeah, I think so. I think that I've always had enough of that, like my favorite term, the delusional self belief. I think I've always had enough of that. I wouldn't be totally surprised about where I am right now. What does feel surprising is that would have pictured, so a year ago, I wasn't a full time coach. I hadn't won really any high profile races. I hadn't had any brands approach me for financial sponsorships or anything. And so, like a year ago, if I had thought, if my running ever becomes a career, what would that look like? And I probably would have assumed, and I definitely did assume, that it would take like a series of steps. Like there would be a timeline where things just gradually improved in terms of my ability to make running my career. Instead, it's all happening at one time. So I became a full-time coach this year. I've gotten my first financial sponsorships. I've won these two races. It's everything that I have wanted running to become is happening all at once. And so that's overwhelming in a really positive way, but it's just totally crazy. So like that, I definitely would not have pictured how quickly everything has changed for me. But that being said, I think to fail as much as I did at the 200 miler or 200-mile distance and then continue to come back to it, there had to have been the self belief was always there for whatever reason, even if there was no evidence for it for why I really believed I could do it at the time. So I do. It doesn't feel surprising to me in that sense. And that being said, I still wake up this year every day just feeling like incredibly grateful. I'm a full-time running coach and a professional trail runner. Like where there's not that many places in the world that I could live where that's my job title. It's really awesome. I get to set my own schedule. I get to work with people towards their goals and I get to run. And like what a cool life that I'm getting to live right now. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's surprising in how fast that it has all changed and how fast it's happened. But yeah, it's been really pretty wonderful.
And I mean, like you said, like even you had DNF, the mental fortitude to come back is that's really commendable. Is because when you get DNF, sometimes it's hard, right? But you have kept coming back and doing and doing, and that just shows your character that you don't give up. So, and that is now proving it, right? So you are getting whatever is coming your way because you have worked really hard for it, and you did not get down. Like, you just kept coming at it. You just believing yourself, and that is called positive manifestation. You were calling, or like, delusional self. I would say that is like a positive manifestation where you are believing in your abilities, and that shows, man, you're winning it. So it is something that you have been building. And if you look at this running, and you have been doing so much of it, right? What is that one lesson that this 200-mile races has taught you that applied outside running?
Picking one is hard, but I mean, I think the overall ultra lesson is that things don't always get worse. That's something to take from whatever distance you're training for. It's just, if in your life you're at a low point, if you just keep pushing forward and you keep doing the things that are the right steps to make you successful at whatever your goals are, like, things will improve over time. So I think that's the big takeaway from ultra running that can be applied to your whole life. But you're talking about 200 milers specifically. I think it's just that you're stronger than you think you are. There's like specific things that I have found surprising this year. Like, for instance, at the Bigfoot 200, I was able to run a 9:30-minute mile at mile 178. So would I have thought that I was capable of doing that 2 years ago? No way. That seemed totally impossible to me. But so there's like little things like that are just like, oh, okay. If you just decide that you're able to do this, like, then that's all that it really takes. And that sort of sounds too simple and kind of silly, but it's true. It's like, you just open up your stride in that moment and run faster. You can do that, and you can apply that to your whole life. It's just like, in these moments, you're down, you're out. If you just put in that tiny bit of extra effort, just take that one step further, just tell yourself out loud that you can do it. It's like, there is so much more potential, I think, inside human beings that we typically let fall by the wayside. And if you can just discover within yourself towards whatever you're working for, it doesn't have to be ultras. It could be writing a novel. It could be progressing in your company. It could be painting or producing a podcast, like any of these things. It's like, you can make yourself better, and I think we're all capable of more than we think. Don't hold back. Like, life is, it's a cliche, but you get one shot at this thing. So why only give 80% of the effort? Just go all in and do your best and shoot your shot. And if it works out, if it doesn't, you'll learn from it.
That is well said. That is, yeah, I agree to that. There are two questions left, and usually these questions I ask everybody. So, first of the questions is, why do you run?
That's a challenging question. I've thought a lot about that this year. The ultra world is interesting because there's so many people that have stories about why they run. There's a lot of, I think, former addicts in the ultra running world who have transitioned their addictive personality into something that's healthier than drugs, alcohol, whatever it might be. But for me, I haven't had many life imposed challenges necessarily. You know what I mean? But doing hard things has always appealed to me. And perhaps that's due to my parents. Perhaps there's something innate there. But the why, I can tell this story where, okay, humans used to be persistence hunters, and the way we're like weak physically. All the other animals in the animal kingdom, if we don't have spears or guns, they kick our ass in a fight.
Yeah.
But what we can do is, the only thing we're better at physically than every single other species is endurance. And we used to hunt woolly mammoths by running after them for a day or 2 days until the woolly mammoth was so tired that we were able to kill it. Like, we were persistence hunters. And so there's some aspect that I feel connected to our ancestors, like that I feel like this connection to what humans have always done in terms of endurance being our primary physical attribute that made us competitive in the world. But ultimately, I don't think I've never once in a race been like in a low moment and been like, why you're doing this, you're connected to your ancestors. That hasn't worked. So I don't know exactly, but I think ultimately, and this sounds tautological or like circular reasoning, but I think the why is actually the answer in and of itself. It's to get to the moment where, like, in normal daily life, you're so distracted with finances, or going to the grocery store, or cleaning your house and vacuuming the carpet, and oh my god, my car needs an oil change, like all of these things. You're distracted by these like intermediate steps that are ultimately maintenance. That's most of what life is. But with running an ultra, like, you're out there to test. You're out there to ask yourself the question of why. What can you do? Why are you doing this? And so the why kind of is the answer to its own question, in that I want to get to the moment where my mind is just like breaking and under stress, and to be able to find out how I respond in those instances. That is ultimately, I think, why I actually do it, because yeah, that's the most salient response I have. And I don't know if it's a good one. I don't know if it's compelling, but it's one of those things that's, until you are in that moment, you just don't know what it's like. You know what I mean?
That is a very unique perspective. I would say that because that is like a completely. I didn't expect that, but yeah, that is. I would say in sort of ways I agree what he said, and I can see what you're trying to say. And this is the final question. I would like you to finish this sentence for me, please. Running has changed my life because.
It's allowed me to pursue passion. It's opened up. I went to college thinking I wanted to be a politician, like I wanted to be a United States senator. Uh, Obviously, I've made a shift away from that goal, and running has shown me that there's so much more to life than the societal carrots and sticks that we tend to associate with success. Success doesn't mean financial success. Success doesn't mean status necessarily. What success can mean is a more esoteric version of fulfillment, contentment, searching for whatever enlightenment might mean to each individual. And that's what running has given me. It's just this inherent connection with the world around me, and the ability to appreciate like beauty in moments of suffering. And I think that so much of human experience, regardless of what we're doing, is characterized by negative thought processes that can bring upon suffering. And if you're able to see the beauty in those moments, I think you're able to have a much happier, healthier life. And that's something I don't know that I would have achieved without running.
Beautifully said. This was a good conversation. I really appreciate you taking your time early morning from Phoenix and
Yeah,
doing
thanks,
this.
Ash.
And yeah, and good luck with more. I'll be keeping an eye on you and see how you do it. And I was when I was looking at Bigfoot and who was participating, and I was like, wow, that has some heavy hitters on it. And you were and beat everybody. And I mean, with respect, right? Everybody who were there, and you set another record. And I'm hoping you do the same in Moab 240. And then, yeah, I'll see you again next time.
Yeah, thanks, Ash. I'd love to talk again, and appreciate you having me on. It was a fun conversation.
Yep, yeah. And good luck and see you next time. Bye. Hey everyone, thank you for making it to the end of the podcast. I hope you really enjoyed this conversation. I'll see you again next time with another guest. Until then, happy running.